We're going to try to keep it free-flowing so anyone can jump in and like respond to one another or ask each other questions. And there will also be time for Q&A and conversation. So I will first introduce our speakers. So we have Shiori on the side from Japan, who's a writer, journalist, and public speaker, author of Black Box, and also a filmmaker who made Black Box Diaries. We have then Ingrid, who was born in Colombia, now based in the US, and is the author of Fruit of the Drunken Tree and The Man Who Could Move Clouds. And then we have Virginia, who's an Australian journalist and gender equality advocate and author of Unfinished Revolution, The Feminist Fight Back. So for this session, I was kind of thinking about, discussions of gender equality, sexism, patriarchy, and thinking about some of the more kind of obvious metrics like the gender pay gap, about representation in politics, how many women in parliament, how many women in business and boardrooms, and thinking that these were the sorts of topics that are often kind of discussed and used as a way to measure gender equality. But what I would like to kind of start the conversation with is more personal experiences of this, right? What are the things that cannot be counted so easily, but that women experience and that you have experienced, things that might not even be, you might not have even expected like sexism to manifest in this way. So I think that would be my first question. What were some of the ways that I think like patriarchy and sexism has manifested that you've encountered that you probably weren't even expecting to see it in this way? If anyone would like to.
I can start. I've been thinking about, listening to different speakers and being here in Ubud, we meet completely different background, different, geographical background people around the world. And I get to told that when I speak Japanese, I'm from Japan, and when I speak Japanese, I'm much nicer and cuter. I'm cute in English too, but yeah. But then it's some topic that I've been thinking about as a Japanese woman that when I was assaulted, when I woke up, this man was raping me, I told him, yamete kudasai, which literally means, please stop. Because growing up in Japan, I have to speak polite. And so, I couldn't say something like, more strong word, even though the man was assaulting me. And of course, it doesn't stop. And I also, this is something I start thinking about after, but in Japan, women has certain way of speaking. So we can say yamete, but it's more like please. And as a man, you can say yamero. And it's more like forcing. And that says also, I start realizing that I don't know how to be angry in Japanese. And so when I, was assaulted, I quickly had to change my mind to say fuck off. And that really made me start thinking unconsciously how my identity and how I could represent myself in society really has been shaped of the language I speak. So I do want to know if that's something yes, you do speak English, maybe Spanish or different languages. Do you have that? Or do you behave differently when you're in Colombia or now in San Francisco? Because I don't think I can wear comfortably this top back in Tokyo, but now I try to be okay to be with my own skin and talk, and I kind of sometimes gather my girlfriends and teach them how to say fuck off. But yeah, this is what it is. And so I feel like it's really culturally embedded, and I don't know where to break it. So I'm trying to be respectful, but I nowadays don't use like polite way of speaking. So that's what I'm trying to do.
That's so fascinating, and I do think that sometimes the gender things are embedded in the language itself. To answer your question, I'm Colombian, and in my book, which is something that I wrote about, I come from a lineage of curanderos or medicine people, and in this lineage, it was only the men who could become curanderos, and then there was this idea in our family that if women were not meant for it, or that if a woman became a curandera, something bad was going to happen in the family. And my mother was the first person in the family to become a curandera. So I think I grew up with this idea that rules were meant to be broken. And my mother is someone who's just very powerful, and she hates cooking. And she would make my dad cook all of the meals. And he just kind of he loved her so much that he was I would describe him as a very classic South American sexist man, and she sort of rehabilitated him. So that when I was growing up with him in our house, he was very gentle and he was very kind, and he was very interested in the life of our minds. But I know that when they first met, for example, just to give you an idea of just the drastic change that there was, when they first got married and she was pregnant with my sister, he would go to work and then lock her inside the apartment. And then he would come back and she would say, like, why did you lock me in the apartment? And he would say, like, you're making it up. So then he would just pretend like that wasn't happening. So I think I also kind of grew up with this idea that there is, even when we have men that do kind of behave like that there is maybe a path to rehabilitate men, and that it takes maybe like a very strong person. But I remember, like, at some point I went back to Colombia and I was visiting my family. And I went through a whole feminist phase where I grew out all my body hair. And this was very normal in the US, right? Or, it's right. And then I went to Colombia, and my uncles did not know what to do with me, What did she say? It's usually when I would go back, it's like, when are you getting married? Like, who is your boyfriend, right? Like, all of those questions, like, how are you making money? Where are you studying? And just, they were so uncomfortable with body hair on my legs and armpits that they just couldn't even look at me, And I found it to be so liberating, actually, because then I didn't have to, ask about their questions of how much makeup I was wearing. Did I look beautiful? Did I not look beautiful? It was almost like I was able to step out of that. And once I did that, I just felt free. And I think now that I could just do anything, and that they're just, I've gotten out of the jail, out of the gender jail. And so I think now they treat me very differently.
I might throw open now to a bit more of a global perspective, but it's fascinating to hear you both. And I think, Shiori, to hear you say, I don't know how to be angry, is something that resonates very, very strongly, I think, with all women, no matter where you come from. And also, Ingrid, the emphasis on the appearance of women and their marriageability and etc. These are things that generations and generations of women have dealt with. And I want to just pick up first and foremost on the issue of anger, because we have been through, I'm from Australia, I'm an Australian journalist, we have been through what I have called in my book, Unfinished Revolution, the Feminist Fight Back, which is available here, but what I have referred to as a national consciousness raising just in the last few years, because women's anger at being belittled, demeaned, treated by our government as secondary, treated appallingly by media. Women's anger built over years and years, and we had a number of stories, particularly of young women coming forward, one speaking publicly about her alleged rape in the office of a minister, her boss, a rape by her colleague. And I say alleged because that has never gone to criminal trial. The trial was aborted. But a federal court did find that she was raped. We had our Australian of the Year in 2021, Grace Tame, who was the victim of sexual grooming by her teacher and rape over a period of 6 months. She came out publicly and spoke. We had a young woman in Sydney who was in her early 20s reveal the truth about rape culture in private schools, elite schools. We had a young woman who was raped on her 18th birthday take the New South Wales, which is one of our biggest state, take the legal system to court to get consent laws changed, and it took several years, but she did, because through her trial, although she was the victim of forced, abusive, violent sexual intercourse, because she hadn't said no, stop, she froze, as an 18-year-old girl would. The judge said because she hadn't said no, it was not a rape. So she ended up taking that law right through the legal system, and the law was changed. So we had a number of these stories of women actually coming forward independently of each other. They were not networked. They were not part of a feminist collective as such. They didn't know each other. And that followed on from a number of female politicians, including government politicians, standing up and talking about sexism in politics and how they had been ghosted, belittled, slut-shamed in our parliament. So this brewing anger among women built and built. And in 2021, we had a massive, Australia's biggest ever feminist rally, a rally of women. In fact, a lot of women who attended wouldn't call themselves feminists necessarily, but the biggest rally of women ever in our history was held on the 15th of March 2021. Over 110,000 people around Australia in 42 different locations at 12 o'clock on the 15th of March, all came out together dressed in our black T-shirts saying, "Enough is enough." That was the rally cry. Enough is enough. So that has, and our media, interestingly, a handful of senior women journalists started pushing back too and talking about women's anger, and even had some senior men talking about angry women journalists, which made us all angrier. But what was interesting, it comes back to what you said, Shiori, that the need to express female anger is really important, and which is partly why I wrote the book that I have, and I'm urging women to find out their own comfort zone or comfort area for a feminist fight back. And it does mean we have to be unashamed of being angry and being pissed off.
Mm-hmm. So building off that, Virginia, I think, what have you observed of, even though these women you mentioned didn't know each other, but I think when there's that anger that brings people together, very often, regardless of what the broader society is, women find ways to teach each other, to share stories, to build power, even if it's as simple as, like sex workers who say, this client we all know, don't ever go into a room with him, or, like this sort of whisper networks of resistance, or like mothers to their daughters. What have you observed about these sorts of communities?
It's a great question, Kirsten. There is no doubt that women sharing their stories creates a power among women. It's empowering. It's empowering to share our stories. Women across Japan have been enormously empowered by what you have done, which has been incredibly courageous and brave. But you will never know how it's impacted some women and changed lives, but it has. And simply, Ingrid, with your work as well. I mean, the way you speak so strongly about female power, these things have enormous impact on other women that we never know of. But just coming back to your question, Kirsten, it's worth noting that this year, 2025, is the 50th anniversary of International Women's Year. And the very first United Nations, the first World Conference on Women, was held in Mexico in 1975, so 50 years ago. It was the first time in the world that such a large group of women had gathered to talk about women's rights and women and violence and women and economic power And that was the beginning of a massive change that we are still trying to work our way through right around the world. And as every single person here knows, not a single country in the world has achieved gender equality. The United Nations says it will be 123 years for gender parity. In my region, Southeast Asia and Oceania Pacific, it will be 179 years. Now, I'm not going to be around then. But, we know that we've got such a long way to go to achieve gender equality. But what is going to change, what is going to push us there faster, and it has to be faster than 123 years around the globe, is women coming together collectively, talking, sharing their stories, and using the power that we feel from the support of each other. And look, women, of course, even back in 1975 at the World Conference on Women in Mexico, there were massive arguments, massive debates. And of course, the media only focused on the debates but didn't actually focus on some of the amazing conversations that were had. And networks were created that have continued right up until this day.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of like when I was watching your film, and there were scenes where like older women journalists were speaking, and you even see like little Japanese grandmas who are like out there protesting for you, right? And they've never met you before, they don't know who you are. And like what really struck me was a friend who had also seen those scenes, like the comment she made was, what truths do you think these older women knew that they would respond to this so strongly, that like your story brought them out, but before your story, they must have had experiences, they must have had stories, there must have been truths that they never said to make them respond so strongly that, like, I don't know this young woman, but I'm a 70-year-old grandma, and I will go out on the street for her. And like, I think to me that was really empowering, but also really heartbreaking, because then you start imagining what this little old lady might have been keeping to herself for a long time. And I think that's really powerful when women are able to come together and let that come out. I think, so we've talked about how, it's been a long history, but also kind of looking at the state of the world today and the different parts, so from Japan, from US, from Australia, we also see changes, and not necessarily always for the better. It feels like in some parts of the world there's, again, this backlash, this, growing sense that, like, this growing narrative that, like, oh, women already have equality and now they want too much. So what have you observed? Have you seen some of this backlash, and what is that? How is that manifesting in your part of the world?
I just want to pick up on the last thing that you said. There is some global research that went around a couple of months ago that found that the majority of people or respondents to a global survey said that in my country, women's rights have gone far enough, And I'm appalled to say that 46% of Australians agreed with that. Now, to say that women's rights have gone far enough, and yet we have such a lack of women in political power around the world, 193 nations around the world, only 20 are headed by women. And it's not just the numbers, as you say, Kirsten. The numbers are important, and yes, we have to track them, but it's attitudes. It's attitudes and presumptions about women and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. When they should be getting married, when they should be churning out babies. To hear that over 50% of the global population in response to a survey has said women's rights have gone far enough just reminds us that we have so much work to do.
Yeah, I think so. Just to add an anecdote from my country to what you said, it's not just about the numbers. So, for example, I'm from Singapore, and last year they named it the Year of Women Development. So they did not name it Women's Rights, but it was Women Development. And then on International Women's Day, the head of the ruling party's women's wing comes out. And she goes, oh, no. How we do it in Singapore is we don't wake up every morning to think about how to smash the patriarchy. We don't do that in Singapore. We are not feminists like that. And then she started listing policies that, according to her, help women. And one of the policies was, our government has made housing more affordable so young women can start their families and run their households sooner. And then we were all kind of like, really? So that kind of really brought home to me that, like, even if you do have women in political positions, the attitude is not enough that she's a woman, she's sitting in the room, but what is the attitude? And like, is there any sort of internalized patriarchy that women also carry.
Yes. Well, speaking about women in power, Japan finally have first female prime minister in time.
But
But well, so yes, it should be that progressive moment to celebrate. But oh no, like for me, it's just everything she's politically stands for are against gender equality. She's against same-sex marriage. She's against for a couple to keep their surname. So often, wife have to take her husband name, and how she view the history very super male-dominated view. And I'm really shocked this happened. I really was wishing that one day we will see the female leader in Japan. But then I was like, not like this, and yeah, it really made me feel and start thinking like what you said. Women in power doesn't mean empowering women, and Japan. Do you know the gender gap ranking? That's by World for Economics. And Japan, I think this year was 118 out of 148. It's the least out of G7. And what it is that we do great in education and health. So it's 4 categories: education, health, political, and economics. But when it comes to economics and politics, really bad. And so the country like Japan, where only less than 10% of female politicians are there, I think it's a good progress. But then again, when they become sitting in power, they follow what power was before. Because the party is very super male dominated. Our liberal democratic party, which is conservative party, has been in power almost always after the war ends. So what does that mean, And so I really am struggling how when we have a very healthy, educated women and we don't have opportunity in our economy and politics, what do we do? And unfortunately, I've been doing my film screening in different parts of the world, and I keep meeting amazing, talented women who decided to leave Japan and living outside, and it's a big Japan's loss. They're losing them, who's very talented, and so that's something we gotta think about it. I don't know how we can turn it into. Maybe we can calculate the number that we are losing, like the economics, effect of it. But it's devastating to think of it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pick up on that point because it's such an important one. Women don't necessarily always work on behalf of other women. There's a saying that the Australian media came up with a few years ago, the crumb maidens. So those women who get into political power and they're so excited to be there that they will do to other women what has been done to them to push them down. I haven't explained that very well, but it's a bit of a phenomena. But I think, again, look, the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, started saying in 2020 that women must learn to take power. And I had never heard a global leader say that before. Every year, and he started saying it very strongly in 2020. Every year he's got stronger saying this. And this year, in 2025, on International Women's Day, he actually said, instead of seeing gender equality, we are seeing the mainstreaming of misogyny. And he went on to say that gender inequity, so gender inequality, is one of the biggest challenges of our age and the greatest human rights injustice of the 21st century. Now, that's not me saying that. That is the head of the United Nations saying that. So he's calling on women to learn to take power because power won't be given. Simple as that. And that's, look, I'm a lot older than both of you girls, so I can say, when I first started in journalism in the 1980s, I was ambitious, and well, you know what it's like. You get into this profession that your dream job, and it's been your dream to progress in, and you do what you have to do to get ahead. It took me a long time to realise that what I was doing as a young journalist was just entering a male system and constantly pushing to get further on, but doing it the male way. What I wasn't doing was trying to change that system and say, you know what? Women can do things differently. It's interesting also, going back to the fact that it's 50 years since the International Women's Year, the Australian delegation to the Mexico conference in 1975 were very firm and it was unpopular in that they were talking about not gender equality. In fact, gender equality, they said, can be dangerous because it can give the impression that tick box, yes, we've done that, yes, we've got 50% women, gender equality done, when it's attitudes, behaviours that make the difference. So the Australian delegation was pushing for the word liberation to be used instead. It's not that women want to be the same as men. We want the same access to the same opportunities, resources and power, but women need to be liberated to be women in whatever form that might be and whatever form that might take. And it might be very different from a male way of behaving. It might be very different from a male way of leadership. But that has to be valued, and that's the problem. It hasn't been valued, which again is why I'm saying, you know, women really need to fight back and get a lot tougher about this now and make demands.
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking at the title of this panel, it also then, to this point, started making me think, like, the war women must wage, but what if instead of thinking about how we can win the war, to ask why are we being made to fight the war? And, like, why can't we just accept that maybe we do things differently, we approach things differently, and it's not weakness? Because I had a very similar experience when I was starting out as a journalist. There was an editor, a female editor, who had put out a call on Twitter for pitches. And there were certain things about it that I wasn't sure about, so I didn't write the pitch right away. I first emailed her and said, can I just clarify this? Right? And then she didn't reply to me, but later she put out a tweet and she went, oh, I put out that thing. And 2 men immediately pitched, very confident, I can definitely do this job. And then some women wrote in with questions. I gave it to the men, because women, you just need to learn to be stronger. And like when I started, like as a like early 20s freelance journalist, was new to pitching, I was quite crushed. I was like, I'm not going to survive in this field. I don't know how to do it like this. And it's taken like, you know, more than 10 years to be like, actually that doesn't make any sense. Mm. If you're not sure, you should ask. And like, you know, there is no reason why we have to like lean in and go boss and like show that we can like do everything as well as men if maybe the way that we do it is different but not worse, right? And so I think I wanted to ask Ingrid as well, like, when you write your stories, it's very clear that, like, whether it's fiction or whether it's memoir, that women have a lot of this sort of power, and it's not about women having to show that they are like men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking there's a story that's in the book that my mother told me when I was very young, and it had just this effect on me, and she would tell it over and over to me, and so this was when she was a little girl, and in her house, every time that it was about to be dinner time, her sisters, my mom and her sisters, had to go to the kitchen and set up the table and sort of like bring the food to the table, and then their brothers and my grandfather would come and they would sit, and then they were supposed to serve my grandfather first and then all of the brothers. I don't know where my mother's rebellious spirit came from, but she was just innately just very rebellious. And so she refused to do it. And so the first time that she refused to do it, my grandmother kind of like dragged her to this outhouse that they had and like beat her with a stick. And so the next day it's like the same story, you know, like go to the kitchen and, you know, serve the family food. And so this time, my mother went into the kitchen and there was a big pot of soup, and she just got on top of the counter and then peed into the soup. So then, well, I know it's amazing. It just had an immense effect on me. So that didn't work though. She got beaten up a second time, and so then the next day, it's like the repeat of the situation. And that time, my mother went into the kitchen and she just grabbed scissors and then she just cut her hair as close to her scalp as possible. And then she just kind of presented herself to my grandmother and said, I'm a boy now, I don't have to do anything that you say. And there was something about, right, like the repeated defiance and the repeated refusal to do something. And I think in that moment, to my grandmother, who would also tell me this story, she did seem like a boy to her, you know, and so I think she sort of like recognized the point, which is, you know, some women are innately ferocious, some women are innately sensitive, and some women, you know, like want to have a family, and other women don't want to, you know. And so I think for my grandmother, this was kind of like a very kind of intense teaching moment. And you know, so after that, nobody ever asked her to like do any chores or like do, you know, like serve anyone. But so I always kind of like think of that as the third way, you know, like cutting the hair is the third way of resisting something. And, you know, the first way of resisting might be putting your body in danger, right? And the second way of resisting might be sabotage, you know, like peeing in the soup. And then this other way, which I think is kind of reimagining the framework of what genders are and doing a gesture that shows to someone, this is a construct, right? Like this is a gender jail that I'm being placed in, and there's no reason for me to do that. But you know, but she even as kind of like strong as she was, and she is, she still, you know, experienced, you know, rape and sexual assault, as did I. And there's a chapter in the book too that's called For Women, and it's do you all know like the Nina Simone song that's called For Women, and it tells the stories of like 4 different women who have kind of experienced you know, abusive husbands, and you know, like 4 situations like that. And I wrote like our family's versions of like 4 women. So I think in some ways, as you're saying, like there's that women can sort of be very ferocious and be very rebellious and have all the sort of right ingredients to be very empowered, and that they will still meet with some sort of structural inequity or some misogyny or some violence. Like you will still kind of experience that in your body.
When you say, you said before that you don't know where your mother's rebellious nature came from, it makes me think, you know, and it's a really interesting point, but deep down, I think women innately know injustice, gender injustice. We innately feel it. We may not even be able to explain it, but we feel it, and that's what pisses people off. And that's why we had over 100,000 women come out on the streets in 2021 in Canberra, women who'd never been to a protest before, because innately they were just pissed off and over it. Something else you just said, Ingrid, made me think too, when we talk about, you mentioned the diversity of choices that women should be able to have and to make. Men need that diversity too. Because there are, I certainly have men in my life who I adore and love, who are demonstrate what we call, in a very narrow way, we might call feminine traits. Mm-hmm. For example, my husband is a big crier and I don't cry. When we go to sad films, I always have to take tissues because he always cries. But, you know, he's a lot more sensitive than I am in some ways. So along the gender spectrum, because I think, you know, a lot of us slide up and down a spectrum, you know, I tend to demonstrate more of what we traditionally call masculine traits than he does. But I think, you know, in a better world and a world that we should be striving towards, you know, the opportunity for men to experience a greater diversity of a way of being, or to be open as well, and that's part of the job of feminist revolution, I believe, is to, I think men are incredibly restricted in a very, very tight frame of masculinity that unfortunately has become incredibly toxic thanks to the manosphere, and some of the stuff we're seeing come out of the United States now is appallingly frightening in the way it is narrowing choices for men. I mean, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, not long after they won office, was on television telling men to become more manly. Mm-hmm. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, Meta and all the rest, was on television, on a podcast actually, and TV, saying that there's too much feminine energy in corporate leadership and it needs to become more masculinized. Mm-hmm. I mean, these binaries are really dangerous for women and men. And that's part of the war we need to fight.
Yeah, I think coming back, like when you said, like, as a woman, you don't know how to be angry, I think very often we find that for men, they are only allowed to be angry, right? You can't be weak, you can't be sad, you can't be depressed, you can't be scared, you can only be angry. And very often that's part of the problem, that like when boys are taught that the only emotion they're allowed to show is anger and aggression, then that also restricts men. So I think now we can open for questions, if lots of hands immediately. So 1, 2, and then 3 in the back. Yeah. Where's the mic? Is there a mic coming around? So 1 here first, and then 2, and then 3 in the back. In front here, yeah. Yes, yeah. And then 2.
Check. Thank you. My name is Junita. I would like to ask you, because when I heard all the discussion, I think that you missed something about the women liberalization from the religion perspective. Because we grew up, our religion is patriarchy, whatever it is. But what I would like to ask you is, what is your opinion about that? We, women, we know what we have to fight. But what about the religions actually trap us? How do we break that? Because our religion, whatever the religion, is patriarchy. Thank you.
And then to pass the mic over to him.
I'm just going to jump in very quickly and add to that. I don't know what your religion is, but every religion is patriarchal. Every religion is sexist. Every religion is sexist. It just is. I mean, there is no religion on the globe and the planet has a woman as its head. Now, why is that, ladies? Why is that? So, you know, it's something, and I see it. I come from I'm not religious, but I come from a Christian culture, I suppose you could call it, and I see women in the church in Christianity, particularly in Catholicism, in the Anglican Church, or actually the Anglican Church, I take that back, the Anglican Church has just appointed, finally, it's the head of the Anglican Church now is female, so I take that back, I'm sorry. But I see women in the Christian churches fighting very much, and always have, for just a piece of power, a piece of respect, a piece of being valued. It's patriarchy's really clever. I mean, you know, it's a wonderful way of controlling women by setting up a whole bunch of rules and laws and then calling them religious, and that you'll go to hell or burn in fire if you don't abide by those laws. I mean, what a great trick. Fabulous, smart. If I was starting up the world, I think I'd do the same the other way around.
Right. I just wanted to... Can you hear me? Yep. Maya Angelou said, "Don't bring me no rocking chair." I've been listening to this and I'm thinking the one thing you're absolutely missing is ageism. And older women have a much harder time than they did when they were younger. And I think that we've got to start addressing that. And we are actually veterans of liberation, if you like, of fighting for liberation. We can bring a lot to that, and it hasn't been mentioned.
I guess as the oldest, and I'm assuming I am sitting here, I'll jump in. ageism through generations and generations and generations has been an issue, but we're really, and I'm glad you've brought this up, it's really obvious now. Can I just add, and I don't know where you're from, but when the March, Australia, okay, when the March for Justice happened in 2021, one of the beautiful things about it, I was a speaker at the Canberra March where we had about 15,000 on the lawns in front of Parliament House. One of the beautiful things was that it was very, very intersectional and it was very intergenerational. And I was up on stage with one of the great heroes of the women's liberation movement who was in her early 80s, who actually spoke about how beautiful it was that on that stage we had about 13 speakers and the youngest was 18 and the oldest was 82 and every demographic was represented. But yeah, you're right. We need to be a lot more mindful of not only the contribution and value of older women, but the ongoing participation of older women. Yeah, I don't know if it's as bad as my mother's generation, but yes, it still remains an issue.
Yeah, I want to quickly add up to that because I do see, and it is so important to talk about the ageism together, but what I feel, especially where I come from in Japan, is so much hierarchy, and we have to respect older people. Even if one year older, you have to speak polite way. And what I find in feminism is that one of the most successful feminists in Japan is Chizuno Ueko. I respect her, I love her, but then people around her treat her like a god and sensei, master. And when I had a talk, we need to sit on the same table. We need to talk about today's and what you used to experience, you are experiencing now, and what I'm experiencing now. We have to talk like this, this. But then it was so hard. And I just really wish to find a way to do the march together. And that sounds so beautiful. And I do wonder, 2021, what happened in Australia?
Well, as I said earlier, it was a build-up, and I detail this in my book. I've got a whole section that details the build-up of women coming out independently, and particularly, as I said, young women. A lot of female politicians, but then young women coming forward and telling their stories that just... And it was the media response that was really interesting. Women in the media who started pushing back and reporting this stuff, and particularly around violence against women. We have a massive problem around violence against women in Australia. Really, really shocking statistics. And it was women in senior roles in the media that really started pushing back and making sure these stories were heard and making them headline stories and front page stories and top of news bulletin stories. And that did make a difference. And it comes back to really what Ingrid touched on before, that rebellion in you don't really know where it's come from, but we know it, we feel it. And, if you share that with others, you realise that, as I said earlier, it's very empowering to share that. But the age thing, I think some people would say, well, it's wonderful that in Japan you have such respect for the elderly. But you're right, though, there has to be an equal sharing among generations. The problem and the resolution, there's no single solution, but resolutions are only found when we work together across generations, I believe.
Yeah.
So we have a question here, and then so we'll pass the mic over to you after.
I would like to ask a bit of a controversial question. I'm about to publish my first novel, which is inspired by my ex-partner and the trauma that he went through, which made him to become a man that is closed to love. As a result of this, I shifted my job of coaching women to coaching men. And I am discovering, working with these men, how much trauma comes from their mothers. So you're talking about, this war that we have to fight, which is also something that is very, very masculine, yes. But my question is, how do we actually bring the men on our side? Where is compassion? Where is the talking? And where is the understanding that if men behave in some way, it comes from something, from somewhere? And the stories I have heard from these men and what has happened, their experiences with women, with their mothers, is terrible. incredibly moving. So what is it that we do to reconcile mothers, their son, the role of grandmothers as well? Because that's very important.
I think Victoria was touching on this earlier, this idea of, I think sometimes we hear feminism or we think about women's issues, and we don't understand a big part of that is that men are as hurt by the system as women are. My father, growing up, had an incredibly hard time getting in touch with his feelings or being, able to like be emotional or talk about his past in a way that could reframe all of the things that he had gone through. And I think his like preferred method to deal with things is to sort of swallow them down, And I remember like the day that I got married, he gave a little speech and then he cried in front of people. And as soon as it was over, I went over and gave him a hug, and he was like, "That was the worst thing that I've ever experienced." And he just meant like crying in front of people. And he's someone who has been kidnapped by the guerrillas. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of like for him, like the worst sort of feeling that he's had is being in touch with his emotions. And I think that, as you're saying, like and I think as we're all saying, we're acknowledging that sometimes women are collaborating with the misogynist project, right? Like they're bringing up men in a certain way. My father was supposed to kind of get a job at a very young age and be able to bring money back, and his sisters were supposed to cook the food, right? Like everyone is being brought up to fulfill these roles. And I do think that we have to ask this question of like, what does it do to a human being to be cut off from emotion? In the same way that what does it do to a human being, meaning women, to be cut off from anger? What does that do, right? Like it actually affects everyone. And I think that in order to change society and to not have people that are half people, right? Like forcing them to live half lives, we have to think about both, yeah.
So you have the question here.
Yeah, hi. I'm my field was men's studies.
Can we hear? Can we speak
you hear
up?
me? My field is men's studies. I did a PhD in the topic of the nexus of sex and money, and I'm a woman of the 70s. I'm a great-grandmother now, and looking back on the whole thing, I think we were subverted. We women, we bought into this idea of women's liberation, not knowing what this would mean, that we would still have to make the babies, we'd still have to make the beds, we'd still have to cook the dinner, and we'd have jobs, and we're expected to have academic careers. I was worn out. Absolutely worn out. No one warned us of this. We bought into this, and I think it was like a patriarchal plot to make us do triple time. And I escaped the whole thing. And I thought, righto, it's all about money, isn't it? It's all about money. So I started being a call girl, and I had a fantastic time and became a multi-millionaire out of it, and got to meet men on their terms and got to see behind the curtain and see where power really lies and how insecure they are. And then when I went and did a PhD on the topic of men and sex and selling sex and going on sex holidays and all of this, I got to interview the Attorney General, and he was not caring one bit for the women. I said, they're trafficking women across borders in contravention of the UN Charter. And I went to the UN and presented a paper on this topic and so on. No one wanted to know about it. He said, oh, I don't care, it won't be my daughter. And the lady chief minister of our Northern Territory said, what do we care? We're not signatories to the bill. So that's how deep it runs. And it gave me an amazing insight. And that was playing it not as a man, playing it as a woman would. You have to work with what you have. And I'm very proud to be a grandmother and a great-grandmother. I've survived the whole thing, but it took a lot of balls, mate, and I don't even have any.
I think you do. I think you do. I think if we can refer to balls as being a metaphor for strength, you got it. You got it.
So there's a question there. And then one, two. And then I think these are the 3 questions that we have time left for.
Okay, thank you so much. Earlier you mentioned about across intergeneration collaboration between women, but I feel like it becomes really very hard and difficult in Indonesia because do you know that actually in 1955, Indonesia has its biggest feminism movement that it has like nationwide spread called Gerwani. But at that time it become really, really strong that the government actually start to hate them and to the point they kill them. So in 1955, our government, they killed the generation that currently we need to supposed to look up to, but they hide them because the women are very powerful. So we have lost one generation of intellectual women in Indonesia. So in cases like Indonesia, when you mention about the intergeneration collaboration in women, how do you imagine how we should start this? Because currently, there are so many feminism movement organizations, but already scattered. They have their own focus. They have their own agendas to sell. So we are not really collaboration and united to one in each other. So in cases like this, how do you think we should start and organizing more and stronger feminism movement? Thank you.
It's a great question, and I can't answer that in full for you, and I'm not au fait myself enough with Indonesia and feminist networks here. But I would say the importance of reaching out to others, and particularly as an older woman and a proud feminist, I've got to say I love it when young women come to me and say, you know, can you talk to us, or what can we do, or how do we do this? Most women I know, most feminist women I know, older women, and look, some of the ballsiest, speaking now, you've got me using that word, but some of the ballsiest women I know in Australia who are feminists, they're in their 80s, but they'll do anything for younger women if they reach out, but they don't want to patronise them, so they won't wait, so they will wait until they're asked because they're very careful not to patronise. But collaboration, collective conversations are critically important. And what you learn, not just older women teaching younger generations, but what younger generations teach older women is phenomenal. So it's a matter of really be bold and reach out. And if you get a rejection or someone says, no, look, I haven't got time to have a coffee with you, okay, we'll move on to the next one. But you will find that women do want to support other women. But I do think, yes, older women are careful not to patronise younger women.
I want to add to collaborative to was also creative. When I published my book, Black Box, I got translation in Chinese in mainland China, and I did the book tour. And when I arrived there, I saw my book has a different title. It says, Black Box, Japan's Shame. And I was like, what is this? You know, no one told me. And it turned out that's how they made it to print. But of course, my reader wouldn't think it's Japan's shame. It's about, you know, gender violence. But then surprisingly, my publisher told me, Shiori, you shouldn't talk about feminism or Me Too because it's kind of censored here. And I'm like, how did you make it happen? Me coming here and talk, this book is all about it. But then I love all these Chinese feminists. They are so creative. They told me I can say rice and rabbit.
So rice is me, and then rabbit is too. So they use rice rabbit as the synonym for me too.
So creative, you know. And I'm like, wow. Of course, it's crazy to, you know, use that way, but there is a way to get away and protect yourself as a feminist. And that's something I learned. We gotta sometimes be creative. And what I feel that back in Japan, where I'm from, we don't have like that crystal clear, straight down censorship, but we self-censor ourselves. And so that's something I learned big time when I went to China. And now I'm learning a lot how we can creatively talk about it when it's difficult to talk about it.
So we'll just take the last 2 questions before wrapping up. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I wanted to ask a question about being a bit suspicious when there's only one seat at a table. I'm Australian and I'm a doctor, and I've been involved in various committees where I've been the only female at the table, and you feel kind of honoured initially, and then you realise that you are representing every single woman and every single woman's needs, which you can't do when you're alone. So it's actually, it seems better in that set of circumstances to actually walk away. And some of those patriarchal circumstances in law, in medicine, the Liberal Party, they seem to be falling apart anyway because there is inadequate female representation.
Being the only woman at a table can be very, very confronting, and it is amazing how often when I've pointed this out to men, particularly in the corporate world, the lack of women around the head table, obviously the board table, and there might be one woman and 10 board members, and they'll say, oh no, we've got gender equality, we've got a woman, we've got a woman, as if that woman has to be representative of all women, and it's absolute bullshit. And you shouldn't feel that you have to be either. But, you know, we just have to keep calling this out. And speaking of calling it out, I noticed just this morning on watching Al Jazeera, the recent Trump visit in Asia when he met with Xi Jinping, there were 12 people around the table, 12. How many men do you think there were? 11. And the one woman there was taking notes. You know, and I was well, I've been in journalism all my life, but I was fronting ABC TV News in Canberra for 15 years and constantly saying, with all of our stories that we would run, particularly on global meetings around the world, ASEAN, G7, G20, etc., that why is it on that podium is majority men? Where are the women? Where are the women? People got so sick of me saying it, but we have to keep saying it. Where are the women? In the previous session in this theatre, I asked one of the speakers who was Chinese and speaking about Chinese-US relations, I asked him why there are no women in the upper echelons, the senior levels of the Politburo. There are no women. And is it because Chinese women are politically not ambitious and have no hunger for power? Because, of course, we know women are ambitious and hungry for power. And he started talking about Afghanistan. He just changed the subject. Look, I've made myself very unpopular on a number of occasions, but we just have to keep calling it out. Where are the women, and why aren't there women at this table? And no, as the only woman, you should not feel that you have to carry the weight of the world of women on your shoulders. I know I have felt it myself, but you shouldn't have to. And I'll just say lastly, a few years ago I was named the ACT Australian of the Year, and I was invited to a lunch with a table of ministers and their partners, their wives, and they were all men. And when it was explained what my work was in gender equality, and I had just set up a research hub at the University of Canberra called the 50-50 by 2030 Foundation, which was about numbers, when I explained all of this, a senior cabinet minister leaned over and he said to me, Virginia, when I look around at Parliament, this was a few years ago, Parliament's different now, but he said, when I look around Parliament, he said, I don't notice how many women there are or how many men there are, they're just politicians. And I said, yeah, that's the problem. You don't notice. Because you know what? You've only got less than 9% of your party is women. So the point being, he doesn't notice. Most of those people in those sorts of senior roles don't notice the lack of women. That's why I've had CEOs and chairs of boards say to me, oh no, we're good on gender equality, we've got a woman. We might have 10 men, but we've got a woman. Or they've got 2 women and they say they've got 50-50. They're completely blind to it. So we just have to keep calling it out. And it's not, whilst it is about the numbers, it's what it represents. And that's what I was trying to say to the previous speaker. How can you have the biggest nation in the world, the biggest population in the world, and at the senior level of the Politburo, there's not a single woman? How can you do that? It doesn't make sense. The disparity, it is not natural, it is not normal not to have women have equal power. It is constructed. It is designed. It is constructed that way to keep patriarchy in control. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to hear that and they feel very uncomfortable and they think I'm mad feminist, but you know what? We need to keep saying it because it's the truth. It is not, our gender, our body does not determine our ability to lead, to be empathetic, to be tough, to be decisive. Our body does not determine that. And yet, nevertheless, when it comes to positions of power and particularly political power, our gender does determine it. And that is not normal, it's not natural, as I say, it is constructed.
Okay, so we are actually out of time. I know there was one question left. Is it okay to take that question very quickly, just because we promised? So there was one question left back there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I'm Gerda from the Netherlands. Actually, my soulmate here next to me already asked the question, because I'm also in a position that I'm always the only woman at the table. So yes, I'm thankful that I got the power as a woman, but it's exhausting. I find it so incredibly exhausting to be in the table around men, because you know, when I make my point, when a man says the same, then he's a strong leader. When I say it, I'm a bitch. You know, and it's like this the whole time. The dynamic is exhausting. So sometimes I want to step out, like you said, because I just want to give up, because I'm so tired of all the monkeys on their mountain. I don't know if that's a Dutch expression. I don't know if you have that expression. The gorillas, you know, look and showing their muscles, and there I am again, the only woman between 10 men, trying to be a female leader. And it's taken me a long time because my only role models were male leaders. So it's taken me a long time to know how to be a leader and also being female. So do you have any ideas on that? How can we stay at the table? Because I think we're both exhausted. Do you have tips?
Just very quickly, women the world over are tired, exhausted, and angry. This century, we have to change that. Our daughters, our granddaughters, their children, we have to change it. And so you're not alone in that. But this is why we just have to get better at pushing back and just saying no.
I feel hot. Like, I feel so much anger now. Can we, I think we have to release this anger, because I don't get too often. So I have an idea. Maybe we can do quick exercise. We can scream and shout the word you think you can represent the anger in your own language or whatever. All right? We can do it.
I'm going to take this mic away. All right.